go. If you like reviews of unusual, rare, interesting, different cars, and in particular Q cars that no one's heard of, then hit that like and most importantly the subscribe button right now. Let's crack on. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and this is a 1997 Rover 200vi. Yes, it's the flagship model from the R3 range from the late 1990s in Rover's small car category. Now, you may notice this isn't the smartest example of the 200vi, but as there's less than 20 left on the road, beggars aren't going to be choosers, and since I actually own this one, it makes life rather easy when it comes to finding a review example. And although it's got a few knocks about it, it does drive exactly as it should. So let's have a look around the 200vi. But before we begin, a quick word from our channel sponsor, Diamond Bright. Proud to be sponsored by Diamond Bright, the car care products that have been keeping the Furious fleet looking their best for a long time already. To find all you need to keep your car clean and protected, follow the link below to diamondbright.co.uk. Now, dumbing things down to the absolute most basic level, you could say that the R3 is really just a reworked, warmed over model of the R8. However, there is far more to it than that. It's a lot more complicated, and really that's not entirely true at all. But I want to talk about that in greater depth on an R3 video around a mid-range car at some point in the future. Today I want to focus on this, the VI, which was the flagship model when the thing came out. But in brief though, yes, it does have the front substructure from the R8, as the front suspension, the steering and the panel work under the skin is substantially the same as before. But as you'll notice, it is a much smaller car. This is now 3.9 meters long, whereas the R8 was 4.2 meters long. So it's lost about 30 centimeters of length, and the overhangs are dramatically reduced. So to make that work, the designers had a big ask, if you can forgive that phrase. Now, often generational progressions in cars are a nice evolution, but in this case it was none of that. Gone are the straight edges, the wedge shape of the R8. This is all new, all curves, and this is down to the design team headed up by David Saddington, who was the chief designer at Rover in the early 1990s. He had a team of 5 very young, I'd say inexperienced is the wrong phrase, but fresh designers, and he had a show of hands, a vote, when they were putting together the predecessor. It was called the Mk3, the prototype that this rose out of. A show of hands on who amongst this team of 5 young designers wanted to buy any of the products that Rover were actually putting out at the time. Precisely 0 of them put their hand up to say they wanted to buy one. He knew he had a problem because they were the demographic that this car was going to be shooting for, so he opened it up to them to come up with design propositions. And the design proposal, in the form of a small-scale clay buck, came from a guy called Oliver Grice, and it was remarkably similar to what we actually see here. So it has been said that the design of the R3 has come from the pen, or the ideas, of the youngest car designer ever. I don't know how true that is, but I'd like to think it is. But anyway, it worked. Back in 1996 or 7, I actually bought one of these as a used car that was only about a year or 18 months old. So yeah, and I was, only just old enough to afford the thing, so it did work. It did capture younger people into the brand at the time. Anyway, as I said, they had a tall order on their hands. Now, doubtless you haven't already noticed this lovely curving, swooping bonnet. It's almost like a 911, the way it rises up over the wings and then rises again in the centre. It's classic design. However, what this does though is disguise the front substructure, because they needed to make it a lot shorter to fit the overhangs and make it look, well, good, but they had the problem that the radiator, the cooling system, the steering, the front crash structure was all protruding quite a long way forward. And if you look at it from above, you'll see the front radiator area does come quite a long way forward of where it wraps around into the corners. They've cleverly flattened off these corners, swooping down, swooping around. The long low headlights disguise this. They've actually wrapped quite a heavy curve into the front of the car, disguising how far forward it actually comes. Very, very clever bit of design. I'm quite impressed by that. Now, under the bonnet was something quite impressive. Yes, it's the Rover K series, much derided for its head gasket issues, but let's face it, there were lots of other cars that had head gasket issues back in the 90s, but a lot was made of this one, and the earlier you go, the less problems there are. This being the flagship, the halo car, until the BRM came out, this got the 1.8 VVC, which was a rip-snorting, fire-chugging monster of a little 1.8, 1796 cc's to be exact, normally aspirated, twin cam, 16 valve and variable valve timing, which means it chucks out a decent wodge of power, 142 horsepower and 174 Newton meters of torque. That makes this little thing really, really rapid and an awful lot of fun. Now the thing you really notice about the VI is just how responsive the thing is. It's a real Jekyll and Hyde kind of car. On the outside it looks very, very plain, very ordinary really. The only splash of excitement visually are the 15-inch alloys. But today they just don't look that big or exciting. They are not bad looking wheels, but you know, compared to the sort of 19-inch, 20-inch leviathans we see rolling under cars today, little quite dinky things. But that is all in contrast to the 1.8 litre VVC powerhouse under the bonnet, which doesn't have to pull a great deal of weight, but really does have a lot of power to do that minor task with. But the driving characteristics of the thing, again, Jekyll and Hyde, because although you can accelerate from 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds in this car, which is just breathtaking and insane, frankly, for a Rover 200 practical little hatchback. And it'll go on to a top speed of 127 as well, so its performance is, well, beyond adequate. It just feels so very, very comfortable and just a nice place to be when you're out on the road. These seats are incredibly comfortable. It's somewhere between an armchair and a bucket racing seat, because you sit in and you are gripped nicely by these big bolsters, but you sink into the lovely, soft, welcoming cushioningness that just greets you like an old friend giving you a hug. It's just an absolute masterpiece of a chair. It's so good. Almost as good as an Alfa 156, but not much comes close to that. The driving position isn't bad either. You do sit a little bit high, but that's fairly common to a lot of 90s hot hatches. You can adjust the height of the driver's seat with a turny handle underneath your squab down there. And because it's a car of the 90s, we've got thin A posts, thin B posts, so visibility is just immense. This chunky steering wheel feels really good in your hands. And it's the same hydraulic power steering you got from the R8. That just carries straight over, and that is a wonderful thing because it is slick, beautifully weighted, and it's a progressive system, so you get more assistance at low speeds than you do at high. All told, everything there is good. You're probably waiting for me to start singing some negatives as well. I haven't really found any just yet. The gearbox and pedals work together in perfect unity, which I think is a rugby song, isn't it? So you've got nice positioning of the pedals, nice weighting of the pedals, the clutch is just the right side of heavy, the gearbox has got just enough resistance, and I wouldn't say notchiness exactly, but enough something in there to make you feel like you're doing something, but just slick enough to just drop through the gears one after another. All told, very nice indeed. Right, let's take a look around the interior of the VI. So first of all, although it is basically the same as any other 200 of the R3 range, we do get a couple of significant differences. First of all, we get this interesting fabric, which I've also seen the identical material on the interior of Jaguar XJS's from the early noughties. Interesting fact. Secondly, that same fabric is all over the seats. There was an upgrade option for black leather with, I think it was purple stitching on it. Very, very nice indeed. The actual pattern template of the seats remains the same though. And we get a leather steering wheel as well. There's not a lot of other major differences. This one you'll notice is a 3-door, which really does suit the car in this VI spec spectacularly. It gives it a whole coupe-esque look rather than the family car, but the 5-door was an option. Basically the only difference between the 3 and the 5 doors was the side body pressings, the length of this wing and the length of the front door, and the lack of rear door obviously. On the 3-door, this huge rear window does pop open at the back, so you can get a bit of air into the car and a bit of ventilation. Climbing over the nice Rover stainless steel sill tread, decent quality carpet, and we have got typical Roverness abounding upon us. So we have got a little wooden insert in the top of the dashboard, we've got the wooden insert in the centre of the dashboard, we've got the leather steering wheel. All in all, the whole thing does look and feel very nice. Now you will notice this is the new bubble dash. This Rover is often called the Bubble 200, and this bubble dash fits in that moniker as well. This is the same dashboard that transferred over to the late, very, very late model Coupe, Cabrio and Tourers, because they weren't going to keep on making the old blocky square dashboard. They all got this as a midlife update or a late life update as well. But some of the actual content of those older dashboards does transfer over. Moving left to right, we have got plenty of air vents, a movable one, a static one to blow air on the window. We've got our airbag cover just there. The T-shelf is minimal and not very flat indeed, so the ability to put snacks on there is fairly limited. A poor come down after the strength of the R8s showing in that particular field. The bubble over the air vents just there looks quite nice, and it repeats in this other bubble here for the clock. These always break, but there's finally a repair service on the market now, so that's good news. This is all very, very 90s with its curvaceous curviness. Then we have another bubble, a round bubble for the instrument binnacle, which contains the same dials and instruments as the R8. Obviously money was saved in places where they could. And this corner is a mirror image of the passenger side. Below that we've got electric mirrors and 2 blanking panels. Who knows what that may have been. Then we have our steering wheel, a lovely chunky leather wheel, perforated leather on the grippy bits on the side, more textured leather top and bottom, and we've got our Rover logoed embossed airbag, SRS in the centre, and horn. Wow, executive parp. That's a properly parpy parp. We like that a lot. We have still got the same stalks left and right for our lights, indicators and wipers. Some things never change. If it ain't broke, don't fix, etc. Great bit of kit just there. Moving into the centre, this whole area looks very modern, very flush and cohesive designed. We've got our front and rear fog lights, hazard lights, rear screen heater, something that's not there. Sadly no air conditioning, but that's not uncommon in a 1997 car in UK and the Europe. That's just the way it was. We do have our fresh air vent for the centre things, which is a Rover trait of old. This would have had a radio with no screen and then use this screen up here in order to read out what station you're on, that kind of thing, but that currently isn't functioning. Our 12-volt lighter socket, our sweetie wrapper tray, and then a cassette holder, because this came with a cassette player from new. Moving back, we have got the 5-speed manual gearbox. This is the R65, and this one is nice and tight and feels great to flick through the gears on the move. There was a CVT option, but only on the 1.6, not on the VI. So if you wanted a fancy sports car here, you had to have the proper gearbox and like it, which I do. Secondly, we've got electric front windows. Centrally mounted switches to save on packaging and manufacturing costs, which makes life easier and cheaper for the manufacturer. Manual handbrake, which is awesome. Jumping back over to the door itself, we spoke about the lovely fabric. We've got cast shiny metal door handles. Because this is a top end one, we've got a tweeter behind that little grille as well. Mid-range bass speaker just there, and a huge door bin. Really practical, useful, big door bins in the doors, obviously. I'll spare another mention of these seats because they are so comfortable and soft, and this fabric feels absolutely delightful. Up above we've got a good deal of headspace, really good actually. The car's a big egg shape really, so you get a great amount of room all around you. This does have an electric sunroof and a centrally mounted light in the middle, which is all good. Let's have a quick look in the back. Right, climbing in the rear, flick up this little switch here, whole thing slides forward and in we jump. Easy to get into with lots of headroom. And then I've got a lot of junk in the back of this car, so a little bit awkward for my feet, but otherwise there will be a lot of space. The seat backs are beautifully lovely, soft velour. We love a bit of velour. We've got handy seat storage in the back there. We've got another ashtray down here for the rear seat smokers. We have got an armrest moulded into each side of the car, and we've got little door bins moulded in the side as well, so lots of storage and practicality. You can see we have got the Rover alarm system in here and grab handles for both the rear seat passengers. The back seats are really comfortable as well. You squish just a bit into this nice fabric and foam and it feels just so good. These seats behind me are 60-40 split, so again, just tons of practicality. Glancing forward, you'll notice that the driver's seat does have adjustable lumbar. The passenger seat doesn't, but lucky driver does get that. I believe that was standard on the VI. Jumping around the back, we have got a nice big push button, chromy and lovely touch feel. Next to the 200vi badge, that gets us into the boot. Proper nice size hatchback with a decent parcel shelf. As I said, 60-40 split on the rear seats. This is missing its hinges, so I'll flick that forward. It's a decent sized boot, but it is significantly smaller than that of the R8 that came before, which makes makes that more of a practical car, regardless whether it's 3.5 or hatchback, saloon, estate, whatever you want to go for. This is not as good a boot space as previously. Under this floor we have got a full-size spare wheel and toolkit all tucked away in there. And we have a courtesy light in the side as well, so handy old boot. And the loudspeakers, you'll notice, are tucked in here. And we noticed on the 1993 Vauxhall Corsa the other day that these rear speakers in these side panels were blocked in underneath, which I think helps sound, but also means the speaker isn't vulnerable, and it makes the whole thing look more, I don't know, a bit more upmarket. In this car, which is being marketed as upmarket, it is still visible. Interesting. So although the R3 went into production in 1995, the flagship of the range, the VI, didn't actually hit the showrooms until January 1997. So it was actually intended that this car was going to be the one that featured in the Englishman in New York advert, which launched the entire 200 range, but obviously without any available because there's no engines. They had to use a 216 instead. It's a really good advert though. I'll try and put a link in the description below, because it shares its 1.8 VVC with the MGF, but they had magnificently underestimated quite how popular the MG was going to be, and they couldn't keep up with production. So their Halo flagship model ran for 2 years less than the rest of the range, until 2000, when the entire 200 range was superseded by the 25. But parts of the VI lived on. This car's got very interesting suspension. The 200 R3 as a whole has got McPherson struts at the front, and they tried to do a clever rear suspension system, but it ate too much of the rear boot and legroom. So they put in a torsion bar, a modified version of the Maestro rear suspension, fine-tuned it and reworked it dramatically to make it, well, the rather fun riding car we have now. But the VI suspension was tweaked for a little bit more sportiness, and that setup was what lived on and moved over to be in the 25 later on. Interesting stuff, huh? It really is unfair to describe this as a warmed over R8. It feels completely different. It does feel like a far more modern and actually more solid product, and that is partly because it is a more solid product. Crash testing had come a long way in the years between the R8 and the R3 hitting the market, so the entire front structure and the crash cell is significantly reworked. So although it is still substantially the R8 in terms of design, the actual metalwork is heavily revised. This road does have a 60 limit. It would be rude not to do a 0 to 60 here, wouldn't it? Let's get the timer going. This thing red lines at 7,000 RPM. I feel like I'm being brutal changing at 5. Oh my god, I'm doing 60 already. Yeah, I didn't actually look at when it hit 60. It just kept on going. It doesn't feel like a Rover 200. You think Rover 200, you think Rover 214. Rover 216 if you're being a bit exotic and fancy. The 218 is a ball of fire. It's just so much fun. The only problem with this car is it just doesn't look special. No one gives it a second glance. I parked a few minutes ago in a supermarket car park between a massively modified Fiesta and a Porsche 911. Porsche, if you want. It was definitely a faster car than the Fiesta, despite all of its bolt-on bits. It was only a couple of seconds slower than the 0 to 60 on the 911. But when the 911 owner walked up, and the look he gave this car, it was withering. And it's a shame because this is so much more exclusive. As I say, there are 18 of these things on the road. It is a very, very special machine. It's unique, it's a unicorn, but no one gives it a second glance. If you want to grab attention, then you need to go and look at the BRM, which is basically the same car, but it's got 20mm lower suspension, because this thing looks like it's riding on stilts. All the rival hot hatches of the 90s were the same with their suspension ride height. It was just massive. The 306X SI, with the Ford RSs, everything just looks like it's just on stilts. So anyway, yeah, the BRM got 20mm lowered. It got the different gearbox with the closer ratios, and it got a torque Caution limited slip diff under the skin, but notably it got that bright orange mouth around the grille and it got the red leather interior, which does, I have to say, look really quite good. If you're seeking attention, that is perhaps the one to go for. Maybe I'll need to get one day, but meantime, I like having cars that no one else has got, which is why I really like having this. But this was the top of the range. This was the one to go for. It had the best engine, it had all the lovely interior, whether it's velour or leather, it was unique to the model. You've got the heated windscreen washers, you've got the sunroof, electric windows. The only thing really you didn't get was air conditioning, which was a monstrously expensive option back in the 1990s. I've got to say, I do absolutely love the look of this car. The styling works perfectly. I love the way the curves just swoop around the car and one curve swoops into the next and repeats. Look on the rear three-quarter, it is such an elegant little shape as the window and the C-post and the badge all just work perfectly. The curves of the bonnet, everything is just it's sinuous. It's an overlooked design masterpiece. It's actually a car I've wanted for quite a long time, and I was thinking I would be happy with a 1.6. I had an SI when they were new. I'd be happy with that again, but really the VI or the BRM are the ones I wanted most of all because, you know, I like the nice ones. But it really is a shame that its plain Jane looks just meant that they haven't survived in any numbers at all. They didn't sell in enormous numbers compared to the more popular hot hatched brands, because people just didn't really think of Rover as a hot hatch brand. It's just the way it was. And so as I keep on saying, there are virtually none left. It does mean though that the values of these things are, well, and skyrocketing is an objective term. Bear in mind that they've skyrocketed from £400 or £500 to £4,000 or £5,000. In percentage terms, that's an enormous amount. But like all Rovers, they are still chronically undervalued. Okay, we've got another 0 to 60. Let's see if we can do any better than the last one. 3, 2, 1, go. In third, sorry, second. Traffic. But this is just such a good car to drive. It's incredibly comfortable, amazingly sure-footed, and just a nice place to be. It's a relaxing thing. I drove this thing to Yorkshire and back a couple of weeks ago for the Furious Driving Social, over 600 miles in 24 hours, and it was amazing. I would have happily driven twice as far and kept on going. It is such a nice car to be in for a relaxing drive. At the same time though, it does have grippy handling, just a hint of understeer and not much more. So you can really play with it and have fun with this brilliant manual gearbox through the corners and just enjoy the car, be part of it. This is perhaps the ultimate Q car. Well, thank you for watching. I really do hope you've enjoyed this ride out in this unbelievably rare 90s hot hatch. If you have, please, as always, hit like and subscribe, you know the drill, and join me again next time driving something completely different.